Chapter 1: The Package That Bled Rain. The rain over Rome that night was not Roman rain. It did not fall in the polite, measured way the city had known for 2,000 years, soft as absolution, drumming on umbrella pines and marble saints. This rain came sideways, hard, almost angry, carrying the scent of high-altitude soil, red volcanic earth, and something sharper, distant lightning that had never touched Italian sky. It tasted metallic on the tongue if you stepped outside. No one did. At 3:17 a.m., the bronze gates of the Vatican Apostolic Archive were still locked, the Swiss guards inside their barracks pretending to sleep. Only one man moved in the entire complex, Brother Matteo Ricci, night custodian, 43 years old, a man whose greatest sin was that he still believed in omens. Matteo was making his rounds with the slowness of someone paid by the hour, flashlight beam sliding over endless shelves of sealed histories. His shoes made no sound on the rubber mats laid precisely for silence. He was thinking about coffee, about the ache in his left knee, about the letter from his sister in Naples he had not yet answered, when he heard it, drip, 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 not the usual condensation from the air conditioning ducts. This was heavier, slower, deliberate. It came from the receiving table near the freight elevator, a low steel counter where packages too humble for daylight were left overnight. There, beneath the single red bulb that meant restricted after hours, sat a cardboard box the size of a human heart. It had not been there 20 minutes earlier. Matteo was certain. He had passed this exact spot on his last circuit, humming an old Neapolitan song under his breath to keep the loneliness away. The table had been empty except for a forgotten clipboard and a dead moth. Now the box was soaked through, dark as peat, sagging under its own weight. Water pooled beneath it in a perfect circle, black under the red light, reflecting nothing. No courier label, no postage, no name, only a single strip of clear tape across the top flaps, already peeling from the wet. Matteo's first instinct was annoyance. Some careless porter had left it in the rain. His second instinct was fear, sharp and childish, the kind that arrives before reason, because the box was breathing, not obviously, not like lungs, more like the way a sealed coffin might shift if something inside decided it was tired of being dead. A faint, rhythmic expansion at the sides, as if the cardboard itself were inhaling the cold archive air and finding it insufficient. He approached slowly, the way one approaches a dog that might be sleeping or might be playing dead. The smell reached him first, wet, white red earth, crushed juniper, and beneath it the unmistakable sweetness of Ethiopian highland frankincense, the exact resin burned in the rock-hewn churches of Lalibela. Matteo had smelled it once, 20 years ago, when a delegation of Ethiopian priests had passed through Rome. The scent had stayed in his cassock for days. He had never forgotten it. The puddle beneath the box was spreading. Though no more water fell from the ceiling, it moved against gravity, inching toward his shoes like a living stain. When the edge touched the rubber toe of his left slipper, it was shockingly cold, colder than the marble floor in winter, colder than the host freezer in the sacristy, cold enough that his skin prickled with instant goose flesh. He should have called security. Protocol demanded it. Instead, he reached out, gloved hand trembling, and lifted the flap. Inside, wrapped in a single sheet of brown wax paper gone translucent with moisture. Lay a cassette tape, a BASF chrome, the kind no one had manufactured since 1996. The plastic shell was the color of dried blood, no label, no writing, only a faint fingerprint smudged across the window where the spools should be visible. The reels were not moving, yet the tape hissed, a low, wet, continuous exhale, as though something inside the shell were breathing through the foam pad. Mateo's gloved fingers closed around it. The moment skin met plastic, even through latex, the hiss became a voice. It spoke one word in Ge'ez, the ancient liturgical language of Ethiopia. Mateo did not know Ge'ez. He had never studied it, yet the word translated itself inside his skull with the violence of a migraine. Open. The cassette was heavier than it should have been, as if the magnetic tape had been replaced by water. Cold liquid seeped between his fingers, running down his wrist in thin rivulets that smelled of mountain rain and distant thunder. Where it touched his skin, the veins beneath turned momentarily black, as though ink had been injected under the surface. The blackness faded in seconds, leaving only the memory of cold. He dropped the tape back into the box. It landed with a soft, fleshy sound. For a long moment, the only noise was the rain outside and the low hum of the archive's dehumidifiers fighting a losing battle. Then the puddle on the table began to move again. This time it spelled something, letters forming and unforming too quickly to read. But Mateo caught fragments, a cross with arms that curved backward, a star with 8 points, and beneath them both the faint outline of a door. He backed away until his shoulders struck a shelf of 14th century papal bulls. The metal edge bit into his cassock. His breath came in small, panicked clouds. The red bulb above flickered once, twice, as though something had passed between it and the power source. When the light steadied, the puddle had stopped moving. In its center, the cassette lay on its side, spools now turning slowly, deliberately, though nothing was playing. The foam pressure pad rose and fell like a tiny lung. Mateo did the only thing he could think of. He took the box, soaked cardboard, impossible tape, bleeding water, and carried it deeper into the archive, past rows of sleeping secrets, down a staircase that officially did not exist, to a steel door marked only with a faded stencil, Reservado Estremo Solo il Prefetto. He did not have the key. No one below the rank of cardinal did. But the door was already ajar, a finger's breadth, as though someone inside had been waiting. Cold air breathed out, carrying the scent of wet stone and something sweeter, myrrh, old bloods, and the unmistakable perfume of Ethiopian coffee grounds left too long in the rain. Mateo hesitated on the threshold. Behind him, far above, the storm over Rome finally broke into thunder that sounded almost like church bells tolling backward. He stepped inside. The door closed behind him without a hand to guide it, and in the darkness, the cassette began to play. Chapter 2, Father Elias, the Man Who Stopped Sleeping Rome. October 1998. The Indian summer had turned vicious. By day, the sun baked the travertine of St. Peter's until it hurt to look at. By night, the air refused to cool, hanging thick and yellow under the street lamps like old nicotine. In the small apartment above the exorcist's office on Via di Porta Angelica, the windows were sealed shut with decades of paint and fear. No breeze had entered this room in years. Father Elias Ventrue had not slept in 9 days. He sat at a plain wooden desk beneath a single green banker's lamp, the kind that makes every face look corpse-like. The lamp's shade was cracked, light leaked through the fissure and painted a thin red scar across his left cheek. Elias was 51, but the mirror on the opposite wall, an antique thing with black spots blooming in the silvering, showed a man closer to 70. The reflection moved more slowly than he did, always a half-beat late, as though it had to be convinced to follow. The room smelled of layered exhaustion, stale, thurible smoke from the brass censer that had not been cleaned since the last case, the sour milk smell of unwashed cassocks, and underneath everything a coppery note that clung to the back of the throat like a swallowed coin. Elias knew the smell intimately. It was the smell that arrived after the third hour of a difficult rite, when the possessed began to bleed from the ears. On the desk lay the tools of his trade, arranged with the obsessive neatness of a man trying to impose order on chaos. A violet stole so old the silk had gone the color of bruise. A small bottle of Jordan water that had frozen solid despite the heat. A Polaroid photograph of the Ethiopian girl, Selamawit, 19 years old, taken the day she arrived. Eyes rolled so far back only the whites showed. Mouth open in a silent scream that had not closed in 72 hours. And a Sony Walkman Professional, headphones dangling like a hanged man. Elias's hands shook as he loaded a fresh TDK cassette. His cuticles were chewed to raw crescents. Dried blood sat under every nail like dark soil. He pressed record with a thumb that left a faint red print on the plastic. He did not speak into the microphone yet. First he listened to the room. The silence here was never empty. It was crowded. He could feel them, the 73 souls he had pulled or failed to pull from the pit over 26 years. They hovered at the edge of hearing, a child's cough from the Milan case in '83, the wet clicking of the banker in Turin who spoke only Babylonian, the soft maternal humming of the old woman in Naples who had tried to kiss him with a mouthful of teeth that were not hers. They waited, patient as dust. Elias closed his eyes. When he opened them again, the mirror had caught up. For one heartbeat, his reflection stared back with perfect synchrony, and in that instant, he saw what the others saw. A man whose irises had bleached to the pale gray of ash, whose lips were cracked and bleeding, whose clerical collar was stained with something darker than wine. He leaned toward the microphone. Log entry, October 9th, 1998, Case 74, Subject, Selamawit G, Age 19, Origin, Tigray Region, Ethiopia. Presenting symptoms, glossolalia in 3rd century Latin, spontaneous stigmata that heal and reopen within minutes. Aversion to the Garima Gospels but not to the Roman Missal. Note, the girl claims the demon is not inside her. It is waiting beneath. His voice was hoarse, almost genderless. The sound of paper tearing slowly. He stopped the tape, rewound 3 seconds, played it back. On the recording, his voice sounded perfectly normal, calm, authoritative, the voice the curious still trusted, the voice that lied. Elias stood. The chair rolled back and struck the wall with a thud that echoed too long. He crossed to the mirror, placed both palms against the glass. It was warm, warmer than the air, as if something on the other side were breathing against it. He stared until the reflection lagged again, until the man in the glass lifted his right hand a full second after Elias himself had lowered it. "Stay with me," he whispered to the reflection. "Just a little longer." Behind him, the censer, cold for hours, suddenly exhaled a ribbon of smoke, gray, thick, sweet with Ethiopian myrrh. It curled toward the ceiling like a question mark, then drifted down and wrapped around his ankles. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees in the space of a heartbeat. His breath bloomed white. On the desk, the Walkman clicked on by itself. The headphones lifted an inch, suspended by nothing, and settled gently over his ears. Tape hiss. Then a voice, his own voice, but recorded in a room he did not remember entering, spoke softly, intimately, directly into the center of his skull. "You stopped sleeping because sleep is where it finds the door, Elias, and the door remembers your name." The cassette spools began to turn backward. The ribbon of smoke tightened around his throat, like a stole made of ash. Elias did not scream. He had forgotten how. Outside, in the narrow street below, a single raindrop, the first of the season, struck the cobblestones. It was cold, mountain cold, and it carried the scent of a country 3,000 miles south, where churches were carved downward into stone, and something very old was already awake. The mirror, finally, caught up. For one terrible second, both Elias and his reflection smiled at the same time. Then the lamp flickered, the smoke vanished, and the room was only a room again. But Father Elias Ventru, the Vatican's last official exorcist, knew the truth now. Sleep was no longer a refuge. It was the corridor. Chapter 3. The Girl Who Spoke Backwards, Latin Rome. 12th of July, 1998. Basement level 4. Palazzo del Sant'Uffizio. Temperature in the corridor, 34 Bickerstoke. Temperature inside the right room, 2 acoustic stokes and falling. The door was steel, painted the color of dried blood, and it opened inward with the sigh of a dying man. Father Elias stepped over the salt line first, violet stole already damp with sweat at the collar. Behind him came Monsignor Luca Moretti, clutching the rituale like a shield, and Sister Chiara Tesfaye, 22 years old, barefoot as tradition demanded of Ethiopian nuns during exorcism. Her black veil the only thing in the room that did not tremble. The girl was waiting. Selamawit G, 19, 1 meter 57, 41 kilograms, the day she arrived. Now she weighed less, much less. She sat in the center of the iron restraint chair, bolted to the concrete floor, wrists and ankles secured with padded leather that had already begun to frost over. Her hospital gown, pale blue, Vatican issue, clung to her body with crystals of ice. Every exhaled breath left her mouth as white smoke that drifted upward, then abruptly fell, as though gravity itself had inverted around her. The room had no windows, only one red bulb above the door and a crucifix of olive wood from Gethsemane bolted to the far wall. The moment Elias crossed the threshold, the bulb flickered, dimmed, then steadied into a bruised purple glow that made everyone look round. Selamawit's head snapped toward him with a sound like green wood cracking. Her eyes were open, but the irises had rolled so far back that only a thin ring of white showed beneath the upper lid. The sclera were not white. They were the color of old parchment, veined faintly with red script no one had yet read. Elias began the litany of the saints in Latin. His voice was steady. It had to be. Sancte Michael Arcangele, defenda nos in proelio. The girl answered before he reached the third name. The words came out backwards, perfect Ciceronian Latin, spoken in reverse, each syllable emerging from her throat as if the sentence had been recorded centuries ago and was now being played at the wrong speed. The sound was wet, intimate, like listening to someone vomit silk. Oile orpnison effedned, elesgara leachim echnas. The temperature plunged again. Luca's breath crystallized on his glasses. Chiara's bare feet left steaming prints on the concrete that turned to black ice in seconds. Elias raised the crucifix. The moment the olive wood cleared his chest, the walls began to weep, not metaphorically, from the bare plaster, directly in front of Selamawit. Dark arterial blood pushed through the paint in perfect Gaia's characters, one letter at a time, as though an invisible stylus were carving from the other side. The script formed faster than any human hand could write. Yasawe leje dame ayewathame kato bato. Translation, whispered later by Chiara with shaking lips. The blood of the Son of Man will not be shed again. The letters dripped downward, thick and syrupy, yet they never reached the floor. They hung in midair, trembling, forming a second, liquid crucifix that mirrored the one in Elias's hand. Then, with a soft, sucking sound, the blood was reabsorbed into the wall, leaving only faint, rust-brown scars. Selamawit smiled. Her teeth were too white, too even, like a child's milk teeth that had never been lost. Salve, Elias, she said, now in flawless Italian, voice layered with a second, deeper register that vibrated in the sternum. You still believe the door opens outward. How Roman of you. Elias did not flinch. He had heard worse, but he felt it, the sudden, intimate pressure behind his eyes, as if two cold thumbs were pressing gently on his optic nerves. The room tilted 3 degrees to the left. Only he noticed, he began the rite of exorcism proper. Exorcizo te immundissim spiritus. The girl's head rotated 180 degrees, not snapped, rotated, slowly, smoothly, the way an owl turns, vertebrae clicking like rosary beads. Her neck made no sound of protest. When her face was completely backward, the smile was still there, upside down now, lips stretched too wide. From her throat came a new voice, male, ancient, amused. Elias, you smell of the catacombs. You have been digging again. The temperature hit 9 degrees. Frost raced across the steel chair in flowering fractals. Selamawit's eyelashes glittered with ice. The blood scars on the wall reopened, wider this time, and the Gaia's letters rearranged themselves into a single Latin phrase that dripped upward. Non est hic. He is not here. Luca dropped the ritual. The book struck the floor and did not bounce. It landed as though the concrete were water. Chiara began to pray in Gaia's, low and urgent, her voice the only warm thing left in the room. The possessed girl's head snapped forward again, normal speed, normal direction, and for one heartbeat, Selamawit's own eyes returned, dark, terrified, human. Tears cut channels through the frost on her cheeks. Father, she whispered into Grinya, voice cracking like thin ice. It's so cold inside. It says you left the door open in 1974. It says you never closed it properly. Elias's hand faltered. The crucifix dipped. 1974. His third case, a boy in Palermo, the one he never spoke of, the one whose file had been burned by his own hand. The girl's voice dropped 3 octaves, became the male timbre again, intimate as a lover's breath against the eardrum. Shall I tell them what you found beneath the chapel of St. Calixtus, Elias? The olive wood crucifix in Elias's hand split down the middle with a sound like a bone breaking. Clear fluid, not sap, not water, seeped from the fracture and froze instantly into crimson ice. Chiara stepped forward, fearless, and placed her bare palm against Selimawit's forehead. The girl screamed. Not human, not animal, something older. Steam exploded where skin touched skin. The scent of scorched myrrh filled the room. On the wall, fresh blood erupted in a perfect circle of Gaia's script, glowing faintly like heated iron. Bereha takafata. The door is already open. Then Selimawit's body went limp. The temperature shot back to 34 degrees Celsius in the space of a heartbeat. Sweat burst from every pore of the 3 witnesses. The frost on the chair melted into puddles that smelled of altar wine and copper in the sudden, suffocating heat. Elias heard it, the soft, patient click of a latch somewhere far below the city. Turning by itself, Selimawit's head lolled forward. A single tear of pure, liquid frankincense rolled down her cheek and hissed when it touched the iron chair. Session 1 lasted 11 minutes. It felt like 11 years. When they wheeled her out, the girl was unconscious, lips blue, pulse barely audible. Behind them, on the wall, the bloodletters had already begun to fade, but the final phrase remained legible for hours, glistening like wet paint. See you tomorrow. Father, bring a warmer coat. Chapter 4. The door that was never on any blueprint necropolis beneath St. Peter's Basilica level. 7. The Scavi, 19th July, 1998. 2:44 a.m. The Vatican necropolis is not a place for the living. It is a city of the dead, stacked in perfect silence. Brick tombs and marble sarcophagus pressed shoulder to shoulder, like passengers on a train that will never arrive. The air down here is older than the basilica above it. It tastes of bone dust and candle smoke from lamps that went out in the 3rd century. Father Elias walked alone. He carried no lantern. The Swiss guard guide, who usually accompanied visitors, had refused to descend past the Clementine Chapel, muttering something about orders from above and crossing himself 3 times. So Elias moved by the faint red glow of emergency LEDs that lined the narrow path every 20 meters. Light the color of arterial blood just before it darkens. His footsteps did not echo. The necropolis swallowed sound the way deep water swallows screams. He had come for the door. For 6 nights since the first session with Selimawit, he had dreamed of it. An iron slab set flush into the living tufa rock, 8-pointed star etched dead center, arms of the star curling inward like petals closing at dusk. The same star that appeared on folio 43 of the Garima Gospels, the oldest illuminated Christian manuscript on earth, preserved only in the mountain monasteries of Ethiopia. The star that Roman theologians had quietly erased from every Western codex after the Council of Hippo. Elias had never seen the door in waking life, yet he knew exactly where it would be. He found it at the end of a corridor that officially did not exist. The Vatican's own 1940s excavation maps ended 10 meters earlier. The surveyors had marked the wall as solid rock, no further passage. But the rock had been cut away centuries ago, replaced by a slab of black iron 2 meters high, 1 meter wide, welded shut with crude, angry welds that looked fresh, as though the torch had been laid down only yesterday. A bronze plaque the size of a prayer card was riveted to the center. The inscription had been hammered in with a blunt chisel, letters uneven, frantic. Anno Domini salvis ad sit, sigillum possidum, est ne unquam recludatur of 378. The seal was placed. May it never be reopened beneath the Latin, someone had added, in the same hurried hand, a single line in Ge'ez, Bareha Tazakero Nawe. The door is only pretending to be closed. Elias's flashlight trembled. The beam slid across the 8-pointed star, etched deep into the iron. The grooves were filled with a pale frost that glowed faintly. The color of moonlight makes on snow. The frost was moving, slowly, like breath on glass. He stepped closer. The temperature around the door was wrong. 18 digs in a corridor that should have been 14 digs Celsius. His exhaled breath crystallized instantly and fell to the ground in tiny red crystals that chimed like glass when they landed. He reached out. He did not want to. Every cell in his body screamed the opposite. But the star pulled him the way the moon pulls the tide. His bare fingertips, he had removed the gloves without realizing, brushed the iron. The pain was immediate and intimate, as though liquid nitrogen had been poured directly into his veins. Skin fused to metal with a soft hiss. When he jerked back, strips of epidermis remained stuck to the star. Perfect fingerprints outlined in frozen blood. The wounds did not bleed. They smoked. In the sudden silence he heard it, a low, rhythmic thumping from the other side of the door, slow as a dying heart. Thump, thump, thump. And beneath the thumping, a voice, not through the air, through the bone of the basilica itself, vibrating up through his soles, into his teeth. Elias. It used the same male timbre that had spoken through Selamawit. You left fingerprints on the wrong side in 1974. We kept them warm for you. The frost on the star rearranged itself into a perfect handprint, 5 fingers splayed, larger than his own, palm facing outward as though something behind the iron were pressing back. Elias stumbled away. His ruined fingertips left smears of blood that froze mid-drip, hanging in the air like rubies on invisible thread. He ran. He did not remember the climb back through the necropolis, past the tomb of St. Peter, past the Swiss guard who would later swear no one had passed. He only remembered the cold chasing him, a living thing that licked at his heels with a tongue made of frost. When he reached the exorcism chamber again, dawn was still 3 hours away, but the room was already waiting. Selamowit sat upright in the restraint chair, eyes open, smiling gently on the wall behind her. Fresh blood had painted a perfect replica of the 8-pointed star, still dripping, and beneath it, in Elias's own handwriting, though he had no memory of writing it, a single sentence, "Welcome home, Father. The door remembers your fingerprints." At 03:17 a.m., the temperature in the chamber dropped to 19 degrees Celsius, the same temperature recorded at the iron door 7 levels below. Somewhere far beneath both rooms, something exhaled, and the welds on the door, ancient, angry, impossible, began to glow dull red from the inside. Chapter 5, Tape 1, The Whisper That Knew Luca's Childhood, Sin Palazzo del Sant'Uffizio, Sub-Basement Archive Room, Città Morta, 24 July 1998, 0106 a.m. The room had no official name, only a nickname whispered by the night staff, Città Morta, the Dead City. It was a concrete box 10 meters underground, windowless, lit by a single dying fluorescent tube that buzzed like a trapped insect. The air tasted of rust and old paper, the smell of confessions that had been filed away and forgotten. Monsignor Luca Moretti sat alone at the metal table, elbows on cold steel, forehead pressed into his palms. He had not slept since the first session with Selamawit. His cassock hung loose on a frame that had lost 6 kilos in 9 days. His skin had the gray sheen of candle wax left too close to the flame. On the table, a battered Sony TCM 200 cassette deck, Vatican property since 1983, one unmarked BASF chrome tape, still faintly damp, a pair of headphones that looked too heavy for his neck, a glass of water he had not touched. Father Elias had left strict instructions. Listen alone. Do not stop the tape once it begins. If you feel the urge to confess, write it down. Do not speak it aloud. Luca's hands shook as he threaded the headphones over his ears. The pads were cracked vinyl, smelling of other men's sweat and fear. He pressed play. At first, only hiss, the soft, oceanic hush of blank magnetic tape. Then a click, intimate as a tongue against teeth. A man's voice began to speak in perfect, cultivated Italian. Not Elias's voice, not Selamawit's, someone else, someone who knew Luca the way a surgeon knows bone. Buonasera, Luca. A pause, as though tasting the name. Ti ricordi il 12 giugno 1971? Avevi 7 anni. Chiesa di San Giuseppe, Napoli. Il confessionale di legno scuro che odorava di cera e di mare. Padre Salvatore era sordo da un orecchio. Così parlavi piano. Luca's breath stopped. The voice continued, gentle, almost tender. Avevi rubato la bambola di tua sorella. L'avevi nascosta sotto il letto perché era l'unica cosa che la faceva smettere di piangere quando la mamma lavorava di notte. Ma poi l'hai rotta. Il collo di porcellana si è spezzato e tu hai mentito. Hai detto che era stato il gatto. Hai giurato sul nome di Gesù. Luca's stomach lurched. The glass of water trembled though he had not touched it. Non l'hai mai detto a nessuno, Luca, nemmeno a Padre Salvatore, nemmeno quando sei diventato prete, nemmeno quando hai preso i voti. Il gatto è morto l'anno dopo, investito da un camion. Tu hai pensato che fosse castigo divino, ma non lo era. The voice dropped to a whisper that seemed to come from inside Luca's own skull. Il castigo è questo, Luca, il ricordo che non muore mai, il peccato che non è mai stato assolto, perché non è mai stato confessato. The fluorescent tube overhead flickered once, twice, then steadied into a sickly green. Luca tore the headphones off. Too late. The words were already inside him, crawling under the skin like frostbite in reverse. He lurched to his feet, knocking the chair backward. The room tilted. His mouth filled with the taste of communion wine gone bad, sweet, metallic, thick. He made it 3 steps before his knees buckled. Black bile poured from his mouth in a single, violent arc. It struck the concrete and spread like spilled ink. But it was not bile. It was the color of altar wine, left too long in the chalice, flecked with gold leaf, that caught the light like fish scales. The smell filled the room, fermented grapes, iron, and beneath it the unmistakable perfume of the Ethiopian frankincense that had begun to haunt every corridor. Luca collapsed to all fours, retching again. More came, enough to form letters on the floor, wet and shining. Peccatum tum, non est absolutum, his childhood sin, written in the vomit of a 34-year-old priest. He tried to scream. Only a wet gurgle emerged. On the table, the cassette deck continued to play, though the headphones lay discarded. The voice, calm, patient, almost paternal, spoke again. Louder now, filling the room through the tiny speaker. Non avere paura, Luca. Il gatto ti ha perdonato da tempo, ma la bambola no. The tape clicked to silence. The fluorescent tube exploded in a shower of sparks. In the sudden darkness, Luca heard the soft, unmistakable sound of porcelain cracking. Slow, deliberate, the way a neck might break. Then footsteps, small ones, a child's bare feet on concrete, walking away from him down a corridor that should not exist beneath the palazzo. Luca curled into a ball on the floor, surrounded by the cooling puddle of his own unabsolved childhood. Above him, somewhere far overhead, the bells of St. Peter's began to toll 1:15 a.m., though every clock in the Vatican read 1606. The tape had known, and it had only just begun. Chapter 6. Sister Chiara translates the Untranslatable Vatican Apostolic Archive, Restricted Translation Cell, 9B, 24th of July, 1998, 04 to 11 a.m. The cell was little more than a concrete box with one chair, one table, one lamp, and one microphone that fed directly into a sealed recorder in the next room. No crucifix on the wall, no window, only a ventilation grate that exhaled the faint, constant smell of old parchment and fear. Sister Chiara Tesfaye sat perfectly straight, spine never touching the chair back. Her black veil was pinned so tightly that the edges cut pale lines into her temples. At 22, she was the youngest person in Rome who still spoke Ge'ez as a living tongue, the only one who could read the ancient uncials without a dictionary. They had brought her here because the tapes were beginning to speak in a dialect no European scholar recognized, Ge'ez that predated the Garima Gospels by centuries. She had been told, translate everything. Do not stop the tape. Do not speak aloud until it ends. If you bleed, do not wipe it away. Chiara pressed play on tape 3. Headphones clamped over her veil. The pads were still warm from Luca's head 2 nights earlier. The tape began with the usual hiss, then the low male voice that had already driven 3 archivists to nervous collapse. This time it spoke only in Ge'ez, slow, deliberate, almost tender. Chiara's lips moved silently as she followed, translating in her mind, writing nothing yet. The voice recited a genealogy, not the usual biblical one. It began with a name she had never heard pronounced aloud. Za Mikael, son of Kedes Hawaria, keeper of the 8th gate. Then dates, not years after Christ, years before. In the 314th year of the era of mercy, the ark was moved southward in the 666th year. The star fell silent in the 1999th year. The Roman shepherd will dream in our tongue and forget to wake. Chiara's pen stopped moving. 1999. Next year, the voice continued without pause, began to recite future events in the past tense. On the third day of April 2013, the white shepherd from the end of the earth will stand on the balcony and speak the name no pope has spoken since the schism in 2025. The door beneath the fisherman's tomb will breathe for the first time in 16 centuries. The lamp above her flickered. Chiara felt it first in her ears, a pressure, as though she were descending in an airplane too fast. Then warmth, then wetness. She reached up. Her fingertips came away red. Blood, bright arterial red, leaked from both ear canals in steady, silent streams. It traced the curve of her jaw, soaked the white wimple beneath the veil, dripped onto the transcription pad where the ink began to run like tears. She did not wipe it. She had been warned. The voice on the tape grew softer, intimate, as if it had moved the microphone inside her skull. Listen carefully, daughter of Axum. The future is not coming. It has already happened. We are only remembering it backwards. A pause filled with soft breathing that was not Chiara's. You will translate this tape. Then you will understand why the eighth gate was sealed in blood, and you will carry the memory forward, because the Roman who opened it in 1974 forgot to close it properly. Chiara's pen began to move again, though her hand no longer felt attached to her body. The voice listed names of popes who had not yet been born. It recited the exact hour and minute of earthquakes that would level cities in 2004, 2010, 2016. It spoke of a pandemic that would begin with bats and end with empty squares in Rome. Every prophecy was delivered in the past perfect tense, as though the speaker had already watched the world burn and was now reading the ashes. Halfway through side A, the blood from Chiara's ears changed color, from red to black, thick as melted tar, carrying the scent of myrrh and burnt coffee. It pooled on the transcription paper, yet the ink beneath it remained perfectly legible, as though the blood were glass. She whispered, barely audible, the sentence that would haunt every subsequent listener. It's not predicting the future, it's remembering it backwards. The tape reached the final 90 seconds. The voice switched to Latin, so ancient it hurt to hear. The Latin of the catacombs. Before vowels softened, before grammar bent to empire, Chiara tesfaye, filia regia, sanguis tuus aperit quod ferum non potest, quando sanguis tuus tanget ferum, octava porta recordabitur faciem tuam. Chiara tesfaye, daughter of kings. Your blood will open what iron cannot. When your blood touches the iron, the eighth gate will remember your face. The tape clicked off. Silence. Chiara sat motionless for a full minute. Then, very carefully, she removed the headphones. The pads were soaked through, warm and sticky. Blood had run down the cable and pooled inside the left ear cup like liquid garnet. She looked at her transcription, 23 pages written in perfect Ge'ez uncials, though she had never been taught the ancient script, at the bottom of the final page, in her own handwriting but not her own will. A single line in red black blood. Tell Elias the door is lonely. It misses his fingerprints. Chiara folded the pages once, twice, pressed them to her lips. The blood tasted of Highland honey and iron. She stood, walked to the steel door, placed her bleeding ear against the cold metal. From the other side, faint but unmistakable, came the sound of someone crying in a child's voice, calling her by a name Her mother had only whispered in the dark when she was small, Tsahai, Tsahai, come home. Kiara did not wipe the blood away. She let it run because the tape had not lied. It was only remembering what was going to happen to her, to Elias, to roam backwards. Chapter 7. The walls begin to sweat. Frankincense and Palazzo del Sant'Uffizio. Exorcism Chamber. Sublevel 3. Night of 27 to 28. July 1998. At 23:47, the temperature in the right room was still a reasonable 26 degrees. At 23:48, it was 12 degrees. At 23:49, the walls began to cry amber. It did not start with a sound. It started with scent. First, one priest in the corridor, Father Domenico, sent to fetch more holy water, stopped mid-step, gagged, and dropped the plastic jerry can. The smell rolled out from under the steel door like a living thing. Ethiopian frankincense, the pure Boswellia papyrifera resin harvested above 2,300 meters. The kind that costs more than gold in Addis Ababa. The kind that has not been used in Rome since the Aksumite delegation of 1520. Only this was not smoke. This was raw resin, thick and wet. The smell of 1,000 ancient thuribles cracked open at once. By midnight, the corridor was unbearable. 2 Swiss guards stationed outside retched into their helmets. One novice fainted outright, nose bleeding from the intensity. The odor was not merely strong. It had weight, texture, temperature. It coated the tongue like honey left in a tomb. Inside the chamber itself, the transformation was slower, almost courteous. Selamawit was restrained as always, asleep or catatonic, head lolling. Elias stood at the foot of the chair, reciting the psalm of protection in a voice that had begun to shred. Luca and Chiara flanked him, pale, exhausted, eyes red from frankincense fumes that had not yet existed 10 minutes earlier. Then the walls sighed, a soft exhalation, as though the concrete had lungs. From a hairline crack near the ceiling, a bead of golden amber appeared. It trembled, swelled, detached, and fell with a sound like a tear hitting marble. Where it struck the floor, it spread into a perfect 8-pointed star that hissed and smoked, though the floor was cold. Another bead, another, then dozens, hundreds, thousands. Within 5 minutes, every wall was weeping thick. Viscous resin, the color of dark honey. It oozed in slow rivers, defying gravity in places, crawling sideways or upward in deliberate streams that met and braided like living veins. The streams met at the center of the far wall and formed letters, Ge'ez again, taller than a man. Caduce Dame Caduce, Shatea holy blood, holy scent. The temperature plummeted to 4 degrees. The resin did not harden. It stayed liquid, warm to the eye but burning cold to the touch. Elias stepped forward and touched one golden rivulet with a bare finger. The pain was instant and theological, cold so fierce it felt like fire. His skin blistered in the shape of the 8-pointed star, bubbles rising white and immediate. He did not scream. He had forgotten how days ago. Luca dropped to his knees, retching again. The frankincense smell was inside his lungs now, coating them, drowning him from within. Every breath tasted of Ethiopian mountaintop at dawn, of ancient liturgies sung in caves, of something vast and sorrowful trying to speak through scent alone. Chiara alone did not gag. She walked to the weeping wall, pressed both palms into the flowing resin, and let it cover her hands to the wrists. The cold burn climbed her forearms, invisible frost patterns. But her face was transcendent, almost ecstatic. "It remembers us," she whispered, voice trembling with awe and terror. "The walls remember every prayer ever offered in Gaiez. They are answering." The resin reached the floor and began to pool, inch deep, gleaming like liquid topaz. Where it touched the salt circle, it hissed and turned black, smoking with a smell of burnt feathers. Selamawit opened her eyes. For the first time in weeks, her irises were visible, dark, human, ancient. Tears of pure frankincense rolled down her cheeks and steamed when they met the resin on her gown. From her mouth came not the demon's voice, but her own, small and exhausted. "In Tigrinya, it's not punishment, it's anointing." Then her head fell forward and the resin surged. In one liquid rush, it poured from every crack, every pore of the concrete, until the room was ankle deep in golden cold amber. The 4 occupants stood frozen as it rose to their shins, their knees, their waists. It did not drown them. It held them. Elias felt it first around his blistered finger. The resin was knitting the wound closed, but backwards, pulling the blister into a perfect 8-pointed scar that glowed faintly beneath the surface. Kiara began to sing an ancient Ethiopian hymn, the Deswa, the one sung only at the finding of the true cross. Her voice echoed strangely, as though the walls themselves were singing with her. Centuries of monastic choirs layered into the stone and now released in fragrant tears. The resin reached their chests. Luca was weeping openly, snot and frankincense mingling on his upper lip. He tried to cross himself and found his arms would not move. The amber had become solid around them, yet still warm, still breathing. Above the door, the red bulb burst. Darkness, absolute. In that darkness, the smell became taste, became memory, became prayer. Every person in the room saw the same vision at the same moment. Highland monks in white robes swinging censers inside rock-hewn churches, a night sky full of stars that bled gold, an iron door beneath Rome flexing, inhaling, exhaling frankincense like breath. Then light returned, not from the bulb, but from the resin itself. The amber glowed from within, illuminating the 4 prisoners in a cathedral of frozen gold. On the far wall, the flowing letters rearranged themselves one final time, dripping upward now, forming a single sentence that burned itself into every retina. "The anointing is complete. The door is ready at 03:17 a.m. The resin stopped flowing. It hardened in an instant, encasing them to the neck in translucent amber, veined with black. Only their faces remained free. Selamawit smiled, gentle, terrible. "Thank you for the incense, Father. It was running low on the other side. Somewhere far below, 7 levels beneath their feet." The iron door exhaled again. This time the scent reached all the way up the ventilation shafts and drifted out over St. Peter's Square, where early tourists woke in their hotel rooms, choking on the smell of a country they had never visited. In the amber cocoon, Elias managed one whispered sentence before the resin sealed over his mouth. "We didn't open the door. The door opened us." Chapter 8. The night Elias cut the welds necropolis beneath St. Peter's Level 7, unauthorized extension, 31st July 1998, 3:03 a.m. Elias came alone. No Swiss guard, no witness, no blessing. He He had stolen the blowtorch from the maintenance depot at 2:17 a.m., signed nothing, left the logbook blank. In his left hand, he carried the torch and a small oxygen acetylene rig on a trolley that rattled like bones. In his right, the violet stole, soaked in holy water and now stiff with frozen